All right, my friends, let us welcome Alex McRoberts to the Sober Stories podcast. Alex, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am really excited to share more about your story with our audience. But before we dig into the juicy details, can you give them kind of the high notes, the story of you, where you are, what you do, who you do life with, what it looks like for you right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am originally from Toronto. I'm Canadian. I have lived overseas for the last 7 years, pretty much all my 20s. And so
Hmm.
I moved out to Kuwait when I was 23 to become a school teacher, then moved over to Abu Dhabi, the UAE. And during the pandemic, so I got sober right before the pandemic in 2019.
Hmm.
And then during the pandemic, created this online business that has a lot of work to do with sobriety and yoga. And so
Hmm.
that's what I do full time. And my life is kind of split between two places. So I'm living in Bali, but my business is based in Dubai. So I'm a little bit, that's why I'm here doing some like logistical stuff in Dubai right now. So
I
yeah.
imagine you have a really good CPA to navigate how to do that for the
what
tax
does
side of that.
what does CPA mean?
Oh, no, no. That's a great question. Certified public accountant, whoever deals with your taxes, I
Yes.
imagine. Yeah, a little complex being in so many different locations.
It
That's
is.
funny.
Yeah,
I guess maybe
exactly.
that's not even a Canadian thing. Anyway, amazing. So you live overseas now. You teach yoga. You have this really wonderful business, and tell us how this all came to be. What is the story of you and alcohol and the person that you are today?
Yeah. So I would say I just had a normal kind of Canadian upbringing around alcohol. People drank, they drank for fun, drank at family gatherings, drank in high school with my friends. And I mean, I've always spoken about it as a very normal teenagehood, although of course as we all experience, once you get into sobriety, you're like peeling back layers of an onion, and I'm realizing more and more that there was actually a lot of kind of um things that I didn't identify as like traumatic experiences as a
Hmm.
teenager that were happening for me. And so alcohol for me became a coping mechanism because I didn't know how to process kind of what I was dealing with. And I then got into this habit, and it became, I don't know when it became, like, it's like what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Hmm.
Like, so I started experiencing mood disorder symptoms at a really young
Hmm.
age, but it was also the same time I started drinking, also the same time that I was going through all
Yeah.
this stuff. And so it's like what really started all of this, I don't know, but it hit a point where I remember, like, I signed the job in Kuwait, and every other person was saying to me, like, "You're gonna get arrested. Like, you know that
Hmm.
alcohol is illegal in that country, right?"
Hmm.
And so people knew me as like the drinker party girl. And so they were concerned. Everyone was concerned about me moving to a country where alcohol was illegal. And I mean,
Yeah.
that should have been a red flag, that was like everyone's first
Hmm.
thought.
Hmm.
And so I was there for 2 years. And this for me, I always say, I had really, really extreme experiences around booze in my 20s. And I think had I not gone through these, I don't know if I would be sober today. I
Hmm.
think I would still be drinking if I were still in Canada. Like, I think it would have been a much slower hit to that point of like rock bottom. But because I
Hmm.
was in these extreme situations, it was like really accelerated. So
Hmm.
I'm in Kuwait where alcohol is illegal. I become obsessed with like making it, dating guys who can get me it.
Oh,
Yeah, I learned how to make wine.
that's a little terrifying.
Yeah, I seriously, people are always like, yeah, you're gonna like have terrible side effects in like your
Yeah.
40s from that.
Yeah.
Well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I like to
Hmm.
think that all my years of sobriety are gonna make up for it.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
Yeah, but I went through this extreme experience in Kuwait, and I start traveling. So I meet someone, I meet a partner that we become in this very serious relationship really quickly. And we're flying to Dubai every other weekend and partying in Dubai. And so Dubai is like the party capital of the region. So many parts of the region are dry, or alcohol is illegal, or they're very conservative
Hmm.
and traditional. So Dubai is like the hot spot where people go for the weekend. They start drinking at noon on a Friday, drink all night.
Mm,
And so when I signed my contract here, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get to live where
mm.
alcohol is like, I'm going to live in this paradise. And then, so to go from
Finally.
like, so to go from this sober world, or not, it wasn't sober, but like the dry, um, world of Kuwait to then come into the party central of Dubai, and I start drinking at noon on the weekends, and it's only a matter of time. Like I think I was there for a year, less than a year and a half before I was like, I have to quit drinking.
Mm,
And so originally it was only 28 days. So I was like, I'm just going to quit drinking for a month and then I'm going to be normal then and go back. And
be
I
normal.
just,
Yeah.
yeah, got through like 11, I think it was like 11 days when I was like,
Mm,
wow, I need to do this for longer. So then I said, okay, 90 days. And then there was this point around maybe 20 days where I was like, wait, my life is so much better sober. I'm just going to do this
mm.
forever. And here I am.
Here you are. I think so many of us have had that thought of like, I'm just going to take this break, or I'm going to do dry January, or I'm going to do a whole 30 challenge or 75 hard or whatever.
Mhm.
And then I'm going to be normal. Then my drinking is going to be fixed. It's going to be normal. And I really resonate with that thought. But also, I think it's so interesting that we have this idea that it's there is normality and or there is normalcy within alcohol consumption, especially if we already have an off relationship with it, that maybe this break will fix us.
Totally.
And tell me more. It's really interesting that you describe this experience as kind of a chicken or the egg experience, because I feel very similar about my own. It was one of those things, it's like, is it this undiagnosed depression and
Yeah.
anxiety that I have, which I have been diagnosed with since in adulthood. And when my drinking was really escalated, it was undiagnosed postpartum depression on top of that. Or was it the drinking? Or did the drinking make it worse?
Yeah.
Or am I more prone to trouble with alcohol because of these things? And I think that from a clinical standpoint, I'm my background's in clinical therapy, and the answer is we don't really know. And the answer
Mhm.
is that these are compounding effects, and that they deeply interact with each other, and that there are resiliency and vulnerability markers that indicate people who are going to struggle with these challenges. But I think this idea of the chicken or the egg is something that a lot of people are going to listen to and say, that's how I feel about it, and I can't quite figure it out. So when you were exploring this early stage of sobriety and also going through this diagnosis of mood disorder, what did that look like on like a tangible level for you? How did you navigate that in those early days?
Yeah, so I actually got diagnosed with the mood disorder at a much younger age.
Hmm.
And I was diagnosed in 2014 and I quit drinking in 2019. So it was
Hmm.
a long period of time in which I was like, I think I was like a pretty high functioning
Hmm.
person with this mood disorder that they had seen, but that was because I was doing so much yoga. Like I was struggling so much and crying out for help and not getting it. And then I found yoga and I just became like addicted to yoga. So I was going to yoga every
Yeah.
single day, sometimes multiple times a day. And that saved me. But I
Hmm.
then also was drinking at night. And
Hmm.
I think when I walked into psychiatry, so that this was a big struggle that I went through was that I knew that I had a mood disorder from a very young age because it is genetic in one side of my family and there's
Hmm.
lots of issues in one side of my family and I could see it in myself and I took a psychology course and I was like this is it. I read the book and I was like this is what I
Yeah.
have. And
Yeah.
I told my parents and they didn't believe me. And
Mm,
part of it was that I think like I think they were afraid of what it would be like because they've seen the worst case of that, which is like,
mm,
unable to hold a job or unable to function. And they didn't want that for me. And so it was easier to
mhm,
just be like, it's not real. You're not actually experiencing
mm,
that than hearing what I was going through. And so I actually went through about 5 years of me trying to get diagnosed and going to doctors and on my own while I was in university, not having any parental support. And then the doctors didn't think that I
mm,
had it because I was
mhm.
like, doing yoga and I
High
didn't
performing.
specifically, I was doing well and I didn't specifically say, I never expressed my suicidal thoughts in words to
Mm,
them because I was afraid that that would make me seem like I was I was so self-conscious of what I even said around therapists because I thought they were judging
Mm.
me. Like that's how much
Mhm.
I had going on. And so I was navigating this whole thing alone. And when I finally got diagnosed in 2014, I still didn't even believe that I had it. Like,
Mm.
so I didn't even tell my parents. And I just started taking meds on my own. And then, I moved across the world to Kuwait. And in Kuwait, it's like if we think there's mental health stigma in
Mm.
North America, like try the Middle
Yeah.
East. Like in the Middle
Yeah.
East, you couldn't even say to a parent, like, I think your child might be suffering with such and such. I was a grade one teacher, and it's like in Kuwait where I first worked, you didn't even speak of a potential,
Mm.
even like something like having dyslexia, for example. It was like
Mm.
seen as a tarnish on the name. That being
Wow.
said, Dubai and Abu Dhabi, I have they are amazing and they are really, really, really trying to be progressive and moving forward. And in 5 years, they had the Special Olympics, they got a mental
Mhm.
health hotline, they've decriminalized suicide. Like, so to be fair, the
Mm.
UAE has done an amazing job in the past 5 years, but I came over here and was so alone. And that's when things
Mm.
really exploded for me in the booze, and I
Mhm.
had no counseling and no supports. And um yeah, I don't even like what was even your question?
How did you find sobriety in that experience when it was so
Yeah.
isolated and it was so stigmatized to have mental health and this was impacting your drinking and all of the pieces that tiptoed you into being sober in 2019?
So the first thing I like to tell people is that for me, it got worse before it got better. And I think that's really
Mm.
important because you have to have that belief that it's going to get better. But for me, the first 11 days of sobriety, and I've only recently started talking about having suicidal thoughts. Like it wasn't something I
Mm.
previously spoke about publicly. And the first 11 days of my sobriety was the lowest point, other than like a
Mm.
breakdown I had had 2 years before. Like the suicidal thoughts were, it was probably my second lowest point in my life. And I
Mm.
had to just keep believing. Like, I don't know what it was, like this
Mm.
faith that things would get better. Like, I have no idea because I didn't know. I didn't know what adult life was going to be like sober. Like, I had no idea, but I just had to keep trusting that it was going to get better. And those 11 days like were so bad. And then I'll never forget, like I feel like it was like day 12 when finally
Mm.
like the sun started shining, and I was like, this was worth it.
Mm.
And so I was, yeah, just really suffering with suicidal thoughts and like panic attacks. And then as soon
Mm.
as I hit around 2 weeks, it all just was like good, but I had to get
Mm.
there. And that's not to say that my life is like perfect, but I certainly um, the lows are never that low. They're never that
Mhm.
long. I don't experience mood disorder symptoms in any way like I used to. I also do a
Mm.
ton of yoga and like,
Yeah.
you know, live yoga basically full
Yeah.
time. So
Well, and this idea of those early days being so difficult while dealing with a mood disorder and heavy alcohol use makes a lot of sense for me from like the neuroscience standpoint because one thing
yeah.
people don't expect when they quit drinking is that we may become dopamine deficient in our brain when we first quit drinking. So dopamine is the neurotransmitter that makes us feel good. We get dopamine from all sorts of things. Our brain naturally produces dopamine, but we get a ton of dopamine from alcohol use. And
Mhm.
with sustained use over time, with continued exposure to these high spikes of dopamine from alcohol, our brain starts to produce less of it on its own. And so when
Mhm.
we remove the alcohol, we have a brain that's not producing as much dopamine and we no longer have our dopamine source. And so I think a lot of people step into these early days and they have this perception of the pink cloud. There's this idea of the pink cloud
Yeah.
out there, which is this immediate feeling of euphoria and feeling well in your body and excited and good and happy and energetic. And a lot of people go into quitting drinking or removing alcohol for a period of time expecting the pink cloud without understanding these other physiological interactions that may have already been happening in their bodies. So it makes a lot of sense to me that those early days were so difficult for you, and I think that that's such an important message to share and to talk about because when people see you or I on social media with
Mhm.
like years and years of sobriety, what they don't see is those early days, or they don't see the time that
Yeah.
you did 11 days and then you went back to drinking, or that you did 90 days. Like this slow progression over time and this resilience building and this tool building that it takes, while understanding our physiology, while understanding our environment and our social settings. And I think it's really just very impactful to share that experience and what the reality of what the reality of it was for you, because I think that
Yeah.
so many people are going to be able to see themselves in that and then finally understand what was happening. So you
Yeah.
talk a lot about yoga and what you do now for work. Can you tell us more about how you went from first grade teacher to living internationally, doing this business, this beautiful mindfulness business where you teach other yoga teachers and you teach yoga and you do retreats and live this very kind of nomadic life? How did you go from first grade teacher to that?
Yeah. I love this question. And I love you mentioned a moment ago about the pink clouds, because I definitely had the pink clouds. After I
Mm.
get through this 11 days, I had this like
Mhm.
euphoria for a short period of time of like, life is awesome. I love Abu Dhabi. I love being a teacher. Wow. Like I distinctly remember driving to work one morning, not being hungover, and looking at the Abu Dhabi Grand Mosque. And it was like I had never seen the building before. And I started to cry.
Mm.
I was like, this is the most beautiful thing seen.
Mhm.
And it is a beautiful building, to be fair. But I went through this period of like, wow, everything is fixed now and it's awesome. And I love everything. And then I hit the come down from the pink clouds. And this
Mm.
was the moment when life set back into normal. And I was like, wait, I still hate this. I'm just sober.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I never wanted to be a teacher ever.
Mm.
It was like kind of an idea put in my head by my dad long time
Mm.
ago. And then I just kind of went with it. It was a career. Then I got to international teaching and I was like, this is cool. I get to vacation. But the thing is, I love teaching. I love the profession of sharing wisdom and teaching people, but I just
Mm.
cannot handle the nervous system overload of having 26 children in the room. I just can't.
Okay, I'm
Like,
laughing because I have a 6-year-old, and every time we just went to a birthday party this weekend, and when I watch like 12 6-year-olds in one contained space, I'm like, God bless teachers. God bless
it's
teachers.
it's unbelievable. And the thing is that the thing is, like, it's not a predictable environment. You can never
Right.
predict the mood someone's going to be in, what's going to happen, the
Mm.
drama, and you're not only dealing with these 26 kids, you're dealing with their parents.
Yeah, sure.
And sometimes they're awesome. And I remember saying to my TA, sitting down with her and saying, I hate this. This class is so bad behaved, because in the year I got sober, I had a really challenging class. And she said to me,
Mm.
Alex, it's just this class of kids. And I said to her, Bae, I've been a teacher for 4 years and 3 out of 4 of them have been bad. We've only had one class that's been good. We have one good
Uh,
group of kids, right? And
yeah.
that's 75%. And I just can't do a career like
Ugh.
this. Like, I just can't.
Yeah.
So she said to me, my assistant teacher said, you should meet my psychic. And she called him her fortune teller. She'd been talking about him for a long time. And she said to me, you should go down to Dubai, meet this guy. And so I ended up saying, I don't really believe in psychics, I don't believe in fortune tellers, tarot card readers. I'm not into that stuff, but whatever. I don't really have anything to lose. And at the worst case, it's
Mhm.
just some money I spent, right? And once you're sober, you like have a bit more money for stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I'm going to meet this guy. So I literally drive an hour and 40 minutes, like from Abu Dhabi to Dubai. And I got into his house and he says, okay, close your eyes, count down from 21 to 1. Open your eyes. I open my eyes and he goes, you were never meant to be a teacher. You were meant to be a
Mm.
healer. And like, I will never forget that line, because I just started sobbing. Like, I started
Mm.
crying so hard. And he's like, you're going to, start this retreat center. It's going to be a fusion of everything, like Tai
Mm.
Chi. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I'm not a Tai Chi teacher, but I teach yoga. And he goes, oh yeah, I think it's yoga. So, which makes me
Mm.
believe that he kind of sees visions and then shares them in words. Cause he also
Mhm.
he kept saying South America, South America. And I'm like, I think it's Bali.
Mm.
Like,
A
and
jungle somewhere.
so,
Mhm.
yes. And so this was like the life changing hour of my life. This changed my life, and I'm still really good friends with this psychic to this day. We do a lot of work together. You can actually buy sessions with him on my website, and so many
Mm,
people buy sessions with him. I swear I'm not like getting a commission. But I do all of it because he literally changed my life. And what
mm,
he did for me was I wanted to be a yoga teacher all along, right? I started teaching yoga in 2014. I told my parents, like, I'm going to just stay here and be a yoga teacher. And they're like, we really would like you to get a job. And the thing is that I just had this dream, but I didn't think it was possible. I was like,
mm,
what is special about me? There's so many yoga teachers. There's nothing special, da da da. And he said to me, no, 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 you are special and you're going to do it. And he said, by age 30, this is what you're going to be doing. And the amazing thing is, like, I turned 30 in
mm.
about a week. And people have always asked me, like, how do you feel about turning 30? Because, people are like, oh, I'm 30. And for me, it's like, I'm so excited
Yeah.
because, like, this is my time.
Mm,
And so, yeah, he just said, like, start working on it. And so I started doing every single moment of my sobriety became devoted to this future.
mm,
And I actually tried to quit teaching more than once. Like, I wanted to quit
mhm,
right away. And he's like, you're not ready. Like, you don't have any income, any business. And then I tried to quit again. And he's like, don't do it. And I got really lucky because I stayed in my job because I just didn't have an income enough yet to sustain. So I stayed in teaching for about 2 years after that, like 2 years and a couple
mhm,
months. But then the pandemic hit, and that was the
mm.
best, worst thing. Obviously, it was a
Yeah.
terrible circumstance for so many people. But for me, a whole bunch of things happened at the start of the pandemic. So not only was I in work from home, but
Mm.
I was like the busy, 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 go, go, go. Like, I have this private yoga client, I have that yoga job. I was teaching yoga spin bar. I was doing
Oh
all
my
this
gosh.
coaching. Yeah, I was working full time. I was working full time, and I was working for this gym in Abu Dhabi, teaching about 6 classes a week for them. And I was also organizing their yoga retreats abroad. And
Mm.
my boyfriend was also my boss there. And
Oh.
then the pandemic hit and we broke up and everything ended. And I got fired from that job. And I was like, well, literally, what do I do now? I'm in lockdown in my house. And
Mm,
that was when the whole thing started. And so I started teaching yoga on Zoom, never thought to this day, like, cause like the idea of a Zoom yoga studio just
mhm.
like did not exist.
Right.
And I never thought that it would become what it is.
Mm,
Never thought I would be doing work in sobriety, right? I was about a year sober at that point, and I actually stumbled into that as well. Like, I ended up offering yoga online for my recovery community, and I was like, "Wait, this is amazing! Like, putting a bunch of sober
mm.
people in a room and doing yoga. This is
Yeah,
cool."
yeah.
And so it's kind of been this thing of like, once it was almost like the whole space had to be clear. Everything had to be
Mm,
clear because I wasn't going to give up all this stuff, like the yoga, the spin, the bar, the tutoring. Like, I wasn't going to quit all that, but I needed it all to be clear for me to just
right.
kind of like sit down and be like, let's make this thing happen. And then as soon as I got the momentum, it was just like, I was like, this is my future. My life in Bali is my future. And I'm just going to do everything I can to make it happen.
Mm. And, I asked that question because I find that it's interesting you say that you never anticipated yourself working in the recovery community because I said the same thing. And I think a lot of people who do now work in the recovery community, it's such a personal thing. And so it
Hmm.
feels hard to share that with others. And also, of course, like I'm imposter syndrome and all the things that say, like, who am I to do this? But
Yeah.
the reason I asked is that I find a lot of people coming to life after they quit drinking, and this idea of your 30s being your time, that's how I feel. It's like
Yeah.
you couldn't pay me to be in my 20s again. They're like I'm
Yeah.
32 and I feel so good and so established and grounded now. But I was sharing this with a client of mine the other day. I was like, you know what? I don't know that I've ever worked with somebody, talked to somebody who hasn't removed alcohol from their life in a substantial way and then said, life is just the same, just without alcohol.
Uh-huh.
Everyone says, like, my life is exponentially better without this
Hmm.
one substance. And I have discovered my creativity. I have changed careers. We interviewed somebody last week who went from being a CPA to a recovery coach. It's like
Kevin.
the yeah, Kevin, exactly. The transformation that comes from removing this one substance. that really in so many ways is suppressing who we truly are and suppressing our dreams and our ambitions and our personality and our ability to look at the future and say, okay, I see this vision for myself and I'm going to go do that, versus I see this vision for myself and I could never, I think is really, really powerful. Tell me more about, and I really like what you said about like how amazing it is to get a room full of sober people together to do yoga. I have this vision, and I'm in my teacher training right now, so I'm a yoga hobbyist, if you will. But I have this vision. I have like a name for it. It's called Yoga Buzz, and it's like Friday night yoga for
Oh, I
sober
love
people
that.
who don't want to go out and drink or something. And like I have no idea where it fits into my life. I have too many things. I have no idea where it fits into my life. But I agree with this idea that there's this really beautiful, powerful connection
Yeah.
between yoga and sobriety. So, what does that look like to you? How do you perceive this connection or interconnectedness between what the heart of yoga is specifically, not necessarily just the movement, not necessarily just the asana, but yoga and being a person who doesn't drink alcohol?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yoga for me became such a big tool in my mental health. And then when I got sober, yoga was like my go to thing when I was like navigating all that um, stuff that I was struggling with. And I didn't even really understand why it worked. I just understood that it worked. And I've gotten really into understanding it. And I actually run yoga teacher trainings kind of
Hmm.
revolving around this. So my 200 hour is just I mean, it's not a regular yoga teacher training, but 200 hours open to anyone. And then I have a couple of other specialized courses. One is a 300-hour in mental health. And then I do a 30-hour sober curious yoga teacher training. And so I'm really
Oh,
interested
cool.
in this link. And what I've found is that yoga is kind of the biggest thing about yoga and how it works is that it helps us move from our sympathetic nervous system to our parasympathetic nervous. So it helps us
Hmm.
move into a state from chronic stress to rest and digest. And so many people who are struggling, like for me, the more and more I do this work, the more I find that people are either struggling with their mental health independently of alcohol, and then alcohol becomes a coping mechanism, or maybe alcohol is creating, hangover anxiety and
Mm.
depression and whatever. And so mental health becomes like a big part of sobriety for a lot of people. And so to have this tool that we can turn to when we're triggered, when we're stressed, when we're upset, when we're lonely, basically all the feelings that we experience that lead us to drink, if we can go to our yoga mat instead. Like anyone who has been through my challenges and is doing yoga every single day and doing the meditation practices and engaging with the community, like typically I find that they're successful because it's when you're not getting on the mat, when you're not taking time to meditate, when you're not using these tools, that the stress becomes, for me, the stress has in the past has become overwhelming, and then I've been triggered to
Mm.
like pick up a drink again. And so
Mm.
there's like this connection between what it does for our mind that we're seeking in alcohol, and now we can seek it in yoga
Mm.
and get the benefits without the hangover.
Yeah, and I a lot of the work that I do is nervous system regulation, and I have a very sciencey brain, so the neuroscience makes sense to me, the physiology makes sense to me, and the way I explain it is exactly what you said about the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the part we're trying to activate from
Mhm.
our physical stress response of fight, flight, freeze, fawn. The part that brings us back down after is really what we want to do. And just yesterday, somebody asked me, what are your go-tos? And I'm like, if I can do 10 or 5 sun salutations, like that will get me out of this
Yeah.
panic crisis mode. And the thing that's so interesting for me is like we approach this through one avenue. We approach this through, say, yoga. And we start to build our toolbox with yoga for the sole purpose of getting through this thing we're doing with alcohol. But the thing is that this can apply to everything we do. This idea of this central nervous system regulation is so universal to all of the different human experiences we have,
Yeah.
that what I find is that people who do this work and who build this toolbox specifically for sobriety end up having so many beautiful, brilliant coping skills for everything else that happens in their life. One of the things that I think is really interesting about yoga is I was reading more about the 8 limbs and the yamas, and there's so many principles in yogic
Yes.
philosophy that I think really, and I read it from the lens of a sober person who is in the recovery world and who has done this work for years. But
Yeah.
I read the yogic philosophy, and everything I read says like there's no place for alcohol in my personal
Yes.
body, in my personal
Yeah.
practice. Can you tell us more about what that looks like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so connected to the yoga philosophy. So that was
Mm,
like kind of a life changing thing for me as well. Discovering there's one mentor teacher that I really admire in this world, Rolf Gates. He wrote a book called
mm,
Meditations from the Mat. And when I was 21, 22, getting into yoga, my yoga studio manager, I was working, cleaning the studio in exchange for yoga. And she said, you should read this book. And in this book, Rolf uh, writes his interpretations of the Yoga Sutras from a modern day lens. And
mm,
he actually is he identifies as a recovered alcoholic, and he was in the
mhm,
foster system and was a veteran, and has just been through so much trauma, a Black American. And so he's writing
mm.
about his perspective of all of moving through all of this with yoga. And I actually met him from on my 100 days sober. I went down to do a yoga teacher
Amazing.
training with him. Yeah. And then I was able to have him as a guest on my podcast last week,
Cool.
which is like surreal. But this text was game changing for me because
Mm,
I was raised without a religious background. And so I didn't really
mhm,
have any toolkit for like interpreting and processing everything that I was going through and making sense of it until I came across the Yoga Sutras. And like
mm,
exactly what you say, like, ahimsa, nonviolence, nonviolence
mhm.
towards the self, nonviolence for
Yeah.
others. Like once you see it in that sense and you're like, wait, everything I'm doing with alcohol, like my binge drinking, my partying, this is all very violent towards myself.
Mm,
I'm literally making myself sick, making myself hungover, making myself anxious, um, putting this stuff in my body that's so bad for me. And it's like, once you
mm,
see it from that lens, I 100% agree with you. And I think it took me a while to get to it, which is funny. So I read this book where he talks about his recovery, and I was like, oh, well, that doesn't apply to me, like, because I'm not
mm,
an alcoholic. And so I just put it on the shelf. And then it's so
mhm,
funny because however many years later, it was 2019, so almost 10 years later, I was like, when I was grasping for sober role models in my early days, this is like I'm like, oh, Ralph Gates is sober. I should read that book
mm.
again.
Yeah, picked it back up.
Yeah.
Well, and they talk about cleanliness and all of these things,
Yeah.
cleanliness of the body, and all of these things. I'm like, it's really wild to me that now we find ourselves in a world where people market things like vinyasa and vino,
I
or
know.
things like beer runs, or it
Yeah.
seems like alcohol has really started to infiltrate the wellness and the health
It
community.
has.
What's your take on that?
It has, and I used to be part of it. Like I
Hmm.
it's funny when you mention a beer run, I'm like, "Oh yeah, I did that with my mom."
Yeah,
We
I
did
did
like
too.
and it was a fundraiser for a hospital. Like it was I'm pretty
Mm.
sure it was even I think it was a mental health fundraiser.
Ugh,
It was a long
ugh.
time ago, but yeah, we ran to the end and then we got a beer and there was a concert.
Mm.
I also used to do yoga and drinking, like beer,
Mhm.
yoga at the brewery. I'm pretty sure I even put on a vinyasa and vino when I lived in Kuwait, where I was like serving
Mhm.
my homemade wine. um,
Have everyone sign a waiver.
yeah, seriously. But yeah, now that I'm sober, this stuff really bothers me, especially
Mm,
when I see how many sober people come to yoga as their refuge.
mm,
Yoga is part of so much rehab, so many programs for people in recovery. And on every YTT I've been on, there's been at least one person who's openly identified as, I'm in recovery, I'm a recovered
mhm.
alcoholic, or there's probably even people that haven't said it, but I'm sure,
Yeah.
all the YTTs I went on were before I got sober. So it
Mm,
would probably be a different experience if I walked around saying, I'm sober. Like I'm sure more people would talk about it, but I think it's really common for sober people to come to yoga for their healing and then for them to be pushed by these studios, or yoga, even like yoga jokes. Or sorry,
Yeah.
alcohol jokes in yoga. Like I'm sensitive to
Yeah.
that. Like when teachers are talking about alcohol, and I'm just like, this is so, people are just so vulnerable. They're in this vulnerable state. And
Mm.
for us to be talking about alcohol and joking about it, and
Mhm.
it just doesn't feel appropriate. But it almost takes, you have to, I do have some empathy for people because I was once in
Yes.
their shoes,
Yeah.
and they don't see the harm that it's causing. They
Mm.
don't realize, until you're on this side of it and you're like, that's
Right.
actually really problematic.
And I see the same thing happening in the mental health field too. I had
Oh
a
my
grad school
God.
friend who I haven't talked to in a long time. She messaged me the other day and said, "I just wanted to let you know that what you share online about alcohol is starting to resonate." She's like, "I still drink, but I'm starting to see it differently."
Yeah.
And what she said, it's really interesting how the social work field and the people who are in the social work field still make those jokes about alcohol or talk about how they use it as self-care or talk about
Yeah.
how they de-stress from a stressful day of serving their clients and being in the mental health field and still having this kind of distorted view of what it is that
Yeah.
we are all consuming. And I like that you said that you have empathy for it because that's the thing. Mommy wine culture was my thing. Mommy wine culture is my hill to die on, and I will talk about it for days. And the reason I do that is because I bought into that so deeply when I
Yeah.
was in early motherhood. And it's a really easy place to find yourself in because it's relatable. It's what everybody else is doing. It gives you this sense of camaraderie, of relaxation, celebration. But when you step away from it and realize what we have started to weave alcohol into and all the different areas that it is starting to show up in our lives, you get a more clear picture of just how harmful this is and just how many people out there are suffering or are struggling without ever saying a word and without ever feeling like they have this space to. So I think it's really very beautiful and really cool that you are creating these spaces for sober curious people, and especially this 30-hour sober curious. I wrote it down. I'm like, okay, I'm going to add that to my mental list, this 30-hour sober curious yoga teacher certification, because it really changes the experience when you have a feeling
Yeah.
of community and safety. Tell me more about what that community looks like for you now. What is your sober community? How do you find connections with other people who are like-minded, especially in this world where it's still pretty uncommon?
Yeah, so my big offering is Sober Curious Yoga. And what that is, it's like evolved over time. Originally it was just like, let's get a bunch of sober people in the room and do yoga. And that's how it started. And now it really has a structure to it. And so every Sober Curious Yoga class serves a little bit like a meeting. So there's an
Mm,
opportunity for a 15-minute check in where people pick up the talking stick and share what's going on with them in a non-judgmental and inclusive safe space where we don't give advice, we don't interrupt, and we practice the values of yoga in the space. And then it depends on what the format is, so it might move straight into a yoga flow, or I also have we had sober curious yoga circles for a while, which I'm now
mm,
bringing back. The original thing was
mm,
sober girls club.
mhm,
Originally it was sober girls yoga and sober girls club, and that's actually going to be making a comeback this April, because I have found, the value of sober curious yoga is great because it's inclusive and we're open to, people of all genders. But there is something really special about this, like
yeah,
this women's only space. And so
yep.
I think it's time for it to make a comeback.
Mm.
But
I
that's
like
kind of
bookmark that
the
for
work that I
myself.
do. Yes.
But I think you're right. I think that especially for women, because so many of the recovery spaces in the world, like the 12 steps and AA, and uh,
Yeah.
uh, we live also, especially, I speak for the United States culture, but we live in a culture where spaces are created for men and there are fewer spaces created for women. And there's a certain safety and a certain
Yeah.
camaraderie that I find when I am in a space with other women. And I particularly like I just like working with women. That's who I work with in my
Yeah.
coaching practice. And those are the rooms that I'm in. But there's a really interesting a bond and connection that really forms there. So I really agree with you on that. Tell me what has been the best gift you've received from sobriety and what has been the hardest thing you've experienced?
I think the best thing has 100% been my business, my community, my life has just like transformed. And it's honestly sometimes even surreal that it's even happened. Like I've had
Mm,
a wonderful opportunity this week to really look back because I did end up stopping by my school. I was just
mm,
driving by and literally the bell was ringing and the kids were all on the street getting picked up. And I was like, oh my God, I'm literally here at dismissal time at the school. Like, this is
mm,
weird. And so I just pulled in the car and I was like, I'm just going to see if they let me in campus. And I went and I kind of walked around and it was like amazing because for the most part, I'm in Bali, surrounded by other yoga entrepreneurs and a lot of sober people. And so I forget how remarkable it really is. And then you have this opportunity to be surrounded by all these people that are like, wow, it's amazing what you've done and
mm,
amazing what you've created. And so that was a really powerful kind of reflection. And I always am just grateful. You know, I wake up and I'm
mm.
like, this is my life. Wow, I get to do what I love, help
Yeah.
people.
The purpose in that.
Yeah, it's just it's just amazing. And the hardest thing for sure, which has also been the has had some good things about it too.
Yeah.
But the hardest thing was I feel like I get more and more like I lost a lot of friends. I get more
Mm,
and more there's my cat. I get more and more I feel like I'm more and more different from where I came from, and
mm,
especially the deeper I get into yoga philosophy, like I know I'm becoming, you know, both my parents are scientists, for example. I grew up
mm.
in like a very modern kind of anti-religious, or not, I don't want to say anti-religious, but kind of like
Yeah.
modern Toronto, you know, we didn't go to church.
Mhm.
And so to have this kid over here like me talking about so much spirituality and like,
Yeah.
you know, I'm just very different from my family, and that's been
Mm,
hard. However, the closer I get to that, like I feel like I've come around and around to it a few times. Like, you know, when I first discovered yoga, and then when I first had my breakdown, and then when I finally got sober, I'm like, this is it. I'm just going to embrace who I
mm.
am. I'm different. And I'm going to find my people. And I have, you know, I've moved to like a island in the middle of the middle of nowhere and I found them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Well,
I
go
was
ahead.
gonna say, I think that's a hard thing a lot of people experience. Like, you might not get into the whole spirituality thing, but you might just find, like, look, I'm not like my friends anymore who want to drink
Mm,
so much. And that's okay. And you really have to make an active effort to find your people and surround yourself with your people, or else I think it's really easy to get back into
yeah.
your drinking ways.
Well, and I think that there there's like entrepreneur brain and there's science brain and there are
Hmm.
different styles of thriving that we each have, and I think that there's a personal development brain too. And I work with clients who say this is hard and this sucks and I wish I didn't have to go through this. And my answer to that is, it does. It can suck. This can be really hard. And it can be really frustrating that this is a challenge that we have, or say mental health or whatever. But I find that working through this and personal development and learning about who you are and caring for your mental health and your body, it's hard and it's work, but it gives us this really deep, rich experience in life. And my take on it is thank God it's hard for me because
Hmm.
of everything it has given me. And what you said, the important asterisks to that is that there's so many of us out there who are on this
Yeah.
journey of finding ourselves, of connecting to who we are internally, but also maybe on a more holistic global spectrum, and really knowing that there's a community of people whose brains work like yours do and
Hmm.
who have the same desires and who want to do this good hard work and who are there to support you and connect with you, and the connections that you have with those people are really strong and really intimate and really they give so much back. So, as we are wrapping up, I always ask one last question on the podcast. If your story were to be written, if the book of Alex and alcohol or Alex and sobriety were to be written, what would it be called and what kind of story is it?
Well, I actually wrote a book.
Yeah, that's so funny because I get a lot of those answers. So like, actually,
I wrote a book and I actually got a Facebook notification as I was like getting ready to do this interview. It was like 1 year ago today, you
mm,
finished, and it was like a Facebook post where I'd written, I finished the final draft of my memoir.
mm,
And so I finished the final proofreading. I think I finished it in 2020, and then I worked on it with a book editor for a year, and then I tried to submit it to a bunch of publishing houses, got rejected, got rejected, got rejected. And now I think I might be moving forward. I do think that it had to hit a pause when it did, so that
yeah,
I could kind of, when it ended, I was still a teacher in Abu Dhabi, and now, I'm
mm,
living in Bali. So it
totally
was
different.
not the right ending. Yeah, but the funny thing is, like, the whole thing of sober yoga girl, that
Mm,
actually was the title of the book.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
that has now evolved into so many things. Like, that's
mm,
the name of my podcast. Like, that all came from the title of the book. And so
mm-hmm.
it's definitely sober yoga girl for sure.
Just gonna stick with that one.
Yeah.
It fits you well. Well, that, I think that your story is so powerful, and really what we're doing here is sharing these stories that somebody else is going to see themselves in, and somebody else is going to see their way into sobriety or their way into living without alcohol or whatever they desire through the lens that you see it, through your lived experiences, through the goodness that yoga has brought to your life and to your sobriety, and that is why we share these stories. So, Alex, thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing your story so candidly. And I know there were some things that you shared with us that are hard to talk about, but they are good, and somebody out there really needs to hear your story. I know our community is going to want to connect with you. So, how can they connect with you? What do you have going on in your world? What are you opening up in the next couple months?
Amazing. Thanks so much. So you can find me on Instagram. Alex McRobs is my personal Instagram. My community is the mindfullifepractice.com. And within there, we have our Sober Curious Yoga community. I mentioned in the podcast that Sober Girls Yoga is making a comeback, which I'm really, really excited about. So,
Telling you, I'm
um,
bookmarking that.
yeah, filming some on demand content and like relaunching the Sober Girls Club. So that's going to be amazing. And then I also have my first live in Bali events. So I was just kind of pausing on everything because, it wasn't
Mm,
open for tourism. There was a quarantine, but it's officially been lifted. And I have a
mm.
group of people coming on my first sober yoga retreat in May. So exciting. I have another one in June in Mexico.
Oh,
And
man.
then, yeah, some yoga teacher trainings coming up in Bali. So really excited about that.
Beautiful. Well, I really appreciate your time today and your story. And I am like seriously bookmarking some of those yoga things because that sounds like a really beautiful dream as well to go do this yoga in somewhere like Bali or Mexico. But Alex, thank you for your time today. Thank you for your story, and we will talk soon.
Thank you so much, Beth. So nice to meet you.